The key scraped against the lock like it was resisting him. Cole adjusted his grip, tried again, and frowned when the knob still refused to turn. The house had been empty for nearly 5 years, the realtor told him. No one had stepped foot inside since the funeral. No visitors, no squatters, no tenants. Just dust, dead air, and a long-forgotten will that had finally made its way into Cole's hands. But as he jiggled the key for the 3rd time, he realized something wasn't right. The door clicked, not from his key but from inside. Slowly, it opened, and standing there barefoot in a long, sun-bleached shirt was a woman. She was tall, unnervingly tall. Her frame took up the doorway like it had been carved for her alone. Brown hair spilled over her shoulders in a loose braid, and her expression was unreadable somewhere between curiosity and calm judgment. Her voice was slow, level. "You're late," she said. Then, without waiting for a reply, she stepped aside and motioned him in. Cole's instincts screamed no, but his pride refused to flinch. He walked past her, boots brushing against the thick rugs laid over the old hardwood floors. The house didn't feel abandoned. The air was warm, faintly scented with herbs. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. Someone had made tea. Someone had swept the floors. Someone had been living here. "I think there's been a mistake," Cole said, dropping his duffel bag by the front chair. "This property was passed to me in the will. I have documents." "We know," the woman said, cutting him off gently. "We've been waiting for you." "We?" he asked, even though his gut already knew the answer. 3 more sets of footsteps echoed from deeper in the house, like the sound of shifting furniture but more deliberate, more synchronized. Then they appeared. One came from the kitchen, a tall, heavy-shouldered woman with ink-black hair tied into 2 thick knots. Another stepped down from the stairs, her arms crossed, expression sharp. The 4th entered from the hallway behind him, casually wiping flour off her hands with a towel. Cole's mouth went dry. They were each massive, easily 6 feet or more, with builds like statues and the kind of slow, deliberate confidence that people develop when they've never been second-guessed. Each of them looked older than 20 but younger than 35. Each of them looked entirely unbothered by his presence, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," he said, trying to summon his authority. "But this house is mine now. I have every legal right to be here." The first woman, still standing near the door, tilted her head. "That's true," she said. "It is your house now." She took a step forward, standing just a breath away. "But it's our home." Then she smiled, not with warmth, but with the kind of smile you give someone who has no idea what they've walked into. "You'll want to sit down for this." Cole didn't sit. Not yet. His legs remained locked in place, even as his eyes darted between the 4 towering women now gathered in the room. There was something off about them, not threatening in the overt sense, but unsettling in how composed they were, how rehearsed this all felt. They didn't seem caught off guard by his arrival, didn't rush to explain themselves or apologize for trespassing. If anything, it was he who felt like the intruder. The woman from the stairs leaned against the banister with her arms crossed, watching him like she was evaluating whether he'd survive the next few hours. "We should introduce ourselves," she said, her voice low and edged with dry amusement. "It's only polite." The others looked at her, nodded slightly, then turned their attention to Cole as if they were actors hitting a mark in a script they'd rehearsed for months. "I'm Dana," said the first, the one who'd opened the door for him. Her expression didn't change as she spoke, still studying him like he was a lab specimen under glass. "This is Lee," she gestured toward the flower, dusted one still holding the towel, who offered a subtle smile and a nod. "Aaron," she added, motioning to the sharp-eyed one on the stairs. "And finally, Juno," pointing to the one with the thick braids and arms that looked like they could bend steel. Juno said nothing, just gave him a single, slow blink. Cole finally exhaled and crossed his arms. "I don't care what your names are. This isn't your house. I don't know what your father told you, or didn't tell you, but legally, he told us everything," Erin said, her voice slicing through the room like a cold gust. "He said you'd come, that you'd try to assert the deed like it meant something, that you'd be confused at first." "Confused?" Cole asked, a dry laugh escaping. "Lady, I'm not confused. I'm just done entertaining this weird squatter's fantasy. So unless you have a reason that doesn't sound like cult logic, I suggest you pack whatever belongings you dragged in here and go." Lee moved first, casually walking into the kitchen and returning with a thick, yellowed envelope. "It's not a fantasy," she said, handing it to him. It's an agreement. Signed, sealed, and left behind with instructions for you. Cole hesitated but took the envelope. The paper was aged, the handwriting neat. His name was written on the front in an old man's scrawl. Cole Anders. For your hands only. The script was unmistakable. It was his uncle's. The man who raised him. The man who never once mentioned having daughters. Daughters who now stood in front of him like judges waiting to pass sentence. What is this? He muttered. The truth, Dana said. The part no lawyer ever gets to read aloud. And what truth is that? Lee stepped closer, her gaze serious but not cruel. That our father left you the house, she said softly. But he left us you. Cole stood frozen with the envelope in his hands, as if it might burn through his skin. The weight of the women's eyes made the room feel smaller, like the air itself had thickened. He wanted to reject what he'd just heard outright, chalk it up to small-town madness or a cruel prank cooked up by bored strangers. But the envelope felt real. The handwriting was undeniably his uncle's. And the four women standing before him didn't flinch, didn't smirk, didn't act like any of this was meant to scare him off. They just waited, calmly, as though they were used to people needing a moment to catch up. Cole tore the envelope open with more force than necessary. Inside was a folded stack of handwritten pages and a notarized document that bore a gold seal, one he recognized from the county office. His uncle's last personal letter. The first page was scrawled in that same familiar hand, loopy and firm. Cole, if you're reading this, it means I've passed and the house is now yours. But there's more to this inheritance than floorboards and fence posts. His chest tightened. These girls, Dana, Erin, Juno, and Lee, they're my daughters in every way that counts, though not by blood. I raised them together, under one roof, on one principle: loyalty before law. They've kept this house alive longer than I have. Fed me, worked the land, protected everything I built when I was too old to keep it going. I promised them that whoever came after me would honor what we made together. That means you, son. Cole lowered the paper slowly. His vision felt distant, blurred by the pounding of his heart. No, 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 no. This is insane. It's not insane, Dana said, stepping forward. It's complicated, but not insane. You can't expect me to just step into his life, he said, eyes darting toward the door. He never told me about any of you. Not once. Juno's voice broke through, low and quiet. He didn't want to complicate your future. He always said you had your own path. But he made promises, Cole. Promises to us. Cole shook his head, fingers tightening around the letter. Promises don't hold up in court. I own this house legally. You want me gone? Fine. I'll be gone by sunrise. But you better be too. Erin narrowed her eyes, her voice clipped. You think this is about a house? Lee stepped closer, pulling a second document from a nearby drawer. He didn't just leave you a home. He left you responsibility. Look again. She handed him a notarized partnership agreement. It was real. Signed. Stamped. Dated 6 months before his uncle's death. Its clauses weren't financial, they were personal. Words like domestic support, emotional stewardship, and the strangest one of all, cohabitation with mutual preservation. What even is this? He said, blinking hard. It's our father's way of making sure we were never abandoned, Dana said. And now it's yours. The room went still again. Cole looked at the four of them daughters not by blood, but by something deeper, something arranged and understood. Either this is a joke, he muttered, or I just inherited 4 very tall problems I never signed up for. Cole spent the rest of the evening in a haze, retreating to the farthest bedroom upstairs, the only one that hadn't been clearly claimed. The door stuck slightly, like it hadn't been opened in years, and the air inside smelled faintly of cedar and dust. A single bed sat in the corner, made up with fresh sheets that didn't match the rest of the house's age. The dresser had been wiped clean. The lamp even had a working bulb. Someone had prepared this room. Someone had expected him to stay. He didn't unpack. He didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed with the letter still crumpled in one hand and the partnership agreement on the floor beside his boot. His mind circled the same questions. Who were these women, really? Why hadn't his uncle said anything? And most of all, what did they want from him? Ownership of the house? Protection? Money? A man? All 4? It wasn't until sometime past midnight that he heard the soft creak of a door across the hall. Curious, he stood and stepped into the hallway. The moonlight was faint but enough to cast silhouettes along the walls. One door had been left ajar. Lee's room, he assumed. judging by the scent of bread and lavender that clung faintly to her clothes earlier. Inside, he could make out her long legs stretched across her mattress, book open on her chest. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, blinking slowly, almost rhythmically. She didn't flinch when she noticed him. Instead, she turned her head just enough to meet his gaze through the cracked doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, voice barely louder than a whisper. He hesitated. "Did you know he never told me about any of this?" "All of us knew," she said. "He said you were his last clean slate. Said he wanted you to choose, not inherit guilt." Cole swallowed. "Choose what? Whether to run," she said, "or to stay?" He didn't respond. Her voice had no expectation in it. She wasn't trying to coax him into staying or shame him into compliance. It was just a statement, simple and honest. He stood there for another few seconds before quietly backing into his room and shutting the door. By morning, the house smelled like coffee and fried cornmeal. Dana was in the kitchen, flipping something in a pan, her long hair pulled back in a knot. Aaron sat at the table, reading from an old journal with a red ribbon bookmark. Juno was outside, splitting wood with terrifying precision, her movements so fluid they looked rehearsed. They hadn't left. None of them had asked him to, either. As Cole poured himself a cup of coffee, he realized something deeply unsettling. He didn't feel like a guest anymore. He felt like someone who had arrived, and that scared him more than the strangeness of the night before, because part of him didn't want to leave. Later that day, Cole found himself in the sunroom, pretending to read one of his uncle's old farming manuals while the real weight of the morning settled in his chest like wet soil. The pages made no sense. He wasn't even looking at the words. He was listening to the soft creaks in the hallway, the humming in the kitchen, the rhythmic slam of the axe out back. Every sound in the house now felt strangely coordinated, as if the four women moved with a shared rhythm, like limbs of the same body. He felt like a foreign object dropped into a machine that had long ago learned to run without him. It was Lee who approached first. She entered the room barefoot again, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Without asking, she placed one on the table next to him and sank into the couch across from him, curling her legs underneath her like it was her favorite spot. "You looked like you needed a cold drink," she said. "Thanks," he replied, still gripping the manual like it meant something. She watched him for a moment, then let her gaze wander to the dust dancing in the sunlight between them. "You know, he used to sit right there and pretend to read too." Same confused look on his face. Cole looked up, his brow tight. "You mean my uncle?" Lee nodded. He wasn't good at talking about feelings, but he was great at pretending not to have them. She paused, her voice softening. "You remind me of him. That's not exactly comforting right now," Cole said, managing a dry laugh. "I still have no idea what he got me into." Lee leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "He got you into us. That's the truth. And he knew it wasn't going to be easy." He sighed and looked at her. "You all keep acting like this setup, this arrangement, was normal. That it's just something I'm supposed to step into. It was normal," Lee said plainly. "For us," he blinked. "You were raised by one man. All 4 of you." "Yes," she said. "And we were raised to share everything. Meals, work, space, even love." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" She didn't flinch. "Yes, we shared that too." The weight of her words hit harder than anything else he'd heard since walking through that door. He wasn't being offered a place to stay or even just a role to fulfill. He was being offered inclusion into something intimate, complicated, whole. "And you think I'm just supposed to be okay with that?" he asked. "No," she said. "We don't think anything. We're letting you decide." He stared at her, unsure what to say, until she stood and turned toward the door. "You have 4 women who already know how to live together," she said over her shoulder. "We're just wondering if you're strong enough to live with us." Then she left the room, leaving Cole alone with his heartbeat thundering in his ears and a glass of lemonade he no longer wanted to drink. That night, Cole wandered outside to clear his head. The sky above the old house was unnaturally clear, the stars sharp and cold against the dark. He sat on a weathered bench near the edge of the orchard, his thoughts swirling louder than the crickets in the grass. Every conversation since he arrived had left behind more questions than answers, more emotion than he was ready to carry. He felt outnumbered, not just by their physical presence, but by the history they shared, one that he'd been dropped into like a stranger asked to fill an empty chair at a family table. He didn't hear Juno approach until she dropped a heavy blanket across his shoulders and sat beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just handed him a tin mug of something hot, tea, maybe, or spiced cider. He took it without protest, grateful for the warmth, and glanced sideways. Her face was unreadable in the dark, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the rigid way her hands held her own mug. "You feel like you're being ambushed," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Wouldn't be wrong," he muttered. Juno let out a slow breath. "We're not trying to trap you, Cole, but we are trying to survive." He looked at her, searching for a crack in the armor. "Survive what?" "Loneliness," she said. "This place, it doesn't care if you're alone. It just keeps going. But we've had to fight for every connection. With each other, with him, and now with you." Cole stared down at the steam rising from his cup. "It just feels like I showed up to a play in the third act and everyone expects me to know my lines." Juno gave the smallest smile. "We didn't write this script either. We were handed it when our father decided to raise us away from everything. He taught us to be strong, useful, self-sufficient. But he also taught us to love deep, fierce." Her voice caught slightly, and for a moment she didn't sound strong at all. She sounded tired. "Then he got old, and everything softened, except the loneliness. That never did." Cole didn't respond. He didn't need to. They sat in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, the night stretching long between them. Eventually, she spoke again, her tone low. "Aaron. She acts like she's above needing anyone. But she sleeps in his old shirt every night. Dana keeps pretending she's in control, but she reads the same letter from him every morning like it'll change. Lee's got a smile for everything, but she cries when no one's watching. We've all been waiting for someone who could anchor us. And you think that's me?" Juno turned to him. "We think it might be, but we won't beg. We just needed you to know this isn't about obligation. It's about belonging." Cole felt the pull again, stronger this time. Not because he was being seduced, but because for the first time, he wasn't being needed as a man. He was being wanted as a person, and that terrified him even more. The next morning, Cole was up before the sun, not because he wanted to be, but because he couldn't shut off the voice in his head repeating Juno's words from the night before. "We just needed you to know this isn't about obligation. It's about belonging." He stood by the window in the hallway, watching the gray light rise over the fields. The house was still, too still. For the first time since he'd arrived, it felt less like a trap and more like something holding its breath, waiting to see what he'd decide. Downstairs, the smell of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. Dana was already at the stove, flipping something thick and golden in a cast-iron pan. She didn't look at him when he entered. "We made enough for 5, she said casually. "In case you were still here." Cole slid into a chair, watching her work. "You could have just asked me to leave." Dana didn't answer right away. She plated the pancakes with precision, adding a dab of butter like it was ritual. When she finally turned to him, her eyes were sharp but tired. "We don't want you to leave, Cole. But we're not going to chain you to this place. You're free to walk whenever you want." He stared at the plate. "You all keep saying that it's my choice. But every word, every glance, it's like you're daring me to stay." Dana's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "Because if you leave, we don't know what happens next. We've kept this place going for years, but everything is stretched thin. The roof's leaking again. The west field needs reseeding. We've got 3 months left on the grain contract and no way to fulfill it without help. Hire someone. We tried. No one stays. Too remote. Too different." She sat across from him, elbows on the table. "But it's not just about the work, Cole, it's about the center. He was the one who held us together, balanced us, made the hard calls, called out the pride when it got too loud." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "He was our compass. And when he died, we started spinning. We've kept it quiet, held it together out of habit. But the cracks are showing." Cole rubbed his face, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. "Why me?" "Because you're not trying to take control. You're not trying to fix us or run from us. You're just here, and you're still listening, even when every part of you wants to bolt." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You really think I could fill his place?" "No," she said. "We don't want you to replace him. We want you to be you. But we also know this place doesn't survive with 4 people pulling in different directions." Dana reached across the table and gently tapped his chest. "You're the only one left who can keep us together, Cole. Not because you're a man, but because you're the right kind of man." And for once, Cole didn't argue. Cole didn't respond right away. He sat in the quiet of the kitchen with Dana's words echoing in his chest, the weight of them heavier than the house itself. The idea of being the right kind of man wasn't something he'd ever claimed for himself. He'd spent most of his life moving alone, not because he wanted to, but because it was easier than disappointing people. Here, surrounded by 4 women who had built an entire life out of stubborn survival and interdependence, he wasn't sure if stepping up meant becoming a leader or just refusing to run. Either way, he couldn't sit in silence anymore. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out the back door into the cold morning air. Juno was already in the fields, hands deep in soil, her back bent with practiced precision. He didn't call out to her. He just grabbed a nearby spade and started digging beside her. She glanced at him but said nothing, her expression unreadable as always. A few minutes later, Lee appeared from the barn with a bucket of chicken feed. She froze when she saw Cole helping in the field. Her smile was quiet, but it reached her eyes. "Guess we'll need a bigger breakfast tomorrow," she said, and disappeared into the coop. By noon, he was covered in sweat and dirt, shoulders burning, hands blistered in places he hadn't known could blister. Erin found him in the shed, fixing a broken irrigation valve with an old wrench and pure guesswork. She didn't offer advice, just passed him the part he didn't know he needed and walked away with a nod. It wasn't validation, it was acceptance. Silent approval that said, "You're doing it. Keep going." That night, the 5 of them sat around the kitchen table for dinner. No grand speeches, no declarations, just food, warmth, and the gentle rhythm of people who were slowly syncing up like gears in a long dormant machine. Conversation drifted toward crop cycles, new supplier options, and the condition of the northern fence. Every now and then, someone would ask Cole's opinion and wait for it. After the plates were cleared, Dana leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "You worked like someone who isn't planning to leave." Cole met her gaze. "You needed help." Juno arched a brow. "That why you stayed?" He thought about it. Thought about the silence in his old apartment, the echo of empty walls and unopened mail, the way no one waited for him anywhere. "No," he said. "I stayed because I wanted to see if I belonged." Erin stood then, walking around the table, and placed something on the wood in front of him. A heavy iron key, older than the ones he'd been using. "This was the original key to the house," she said. "He only gave it to people he trusted with everything." Cole stared at it, then looked up at the women around him. "What do I have to do to keep it?" he asked. Dana's eyes softened. "Just show us," she said quietly, "that you're not afraid to stay." 3 months later, Cole stood on the front porch where it all began. The sun was setting low across the western fields, casting long golden rays that cut between the trees and painted the land in amber. 4 shadows stretched beside his, not looming now, but grounded, rooted like the beams holding up the porch roof. Each woman stood beside him in silence, mugs of coffee in hand, watching the crops sway gently in the evening wind. The land looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. The irrigation system flowed without leaks. The grain contract had been fulfilled ahead of schedule. They'd planted new apple trees, reinforced the chicken coop, and hosted a trade meeting with 2 neighboring ranches. The operation ran smoother than it ever had, but it wasn't just the work. The biggest change had been inside the house inside him. The strange unease that had followed him like a shadow during those early days had dissolved into a kind of belonging he hadn't known he needed. Inside, there were signs of shared life now. A 5th coat on the rack, a pair of boots by the back door that didn't belong to any of the women. His name etched onto the new ledger they all signed for harvest planning. Every room had been touched by him, just as he had been touched by them, not in the way people whispered about, but in the way that mattered. In the space between chores and coffee, in the glances held too long, in the silences shared instead of filled. Helena leaned her shoulder against the frame beside him, her once cold demeanor now worn down to something steady and unshakable. She didn't say much anymore, not because she didn't care, but because she no longer needed to prove she did. Erin stepped outside next, tucking her journal under her arm and stretching like a cat. She'd started leaving her bedroom door open some nights, the light spilling into the hallway like an invitation to exist without walls. Juno walked out after her, wiping grease from her fingers, having just repaired the tractor engine with Cole's help. She nodded to him without words, her language now one of shared sweat and unspoken pride. And Lee, always barefoot, arrived last, carrying 2 blankets and placing one over his shoulders without asking. She'd been the first to welcome him, and the first to believe he'd stay. Dana was the one who finally broke the quiet. "You regret it yet?" she asked, sipping from her mug. Cole looked out at the land, then at each of them in turn. He thought of the man he was when he arrived, skeptical, guarded, half ready to run. That man didn't exist anymore. "Only that I didn't come sooner," he said. Juno smirked. "He's turning into a softie." "Shut up," Cole said, smiling despite himself. They all laughed, their voices tangled like vines across the porch rail. And as the sun dipped below the hill, Cole knew this house didn't just belong to him now. He belonged to it.